Your first month of retirement, you move 2 years of spending into a savings account. It feels responsible. It also means $138,000 that could have stayed invested is now sitting there earning almost nothing. And here's the strange part. A much smaller amount, sized correctly, protects you just as well. Your Social Security stays on the same schedule. Your investments stay invested. You're not selling anything early, and you're not touching your 401k or IRA in a way you didn't plan for. What changes is one number: how much cash you actually need sitting idle before you retire versus how much you've been told to keep. The mechanism is called a spending gap reserve, and in a minute I'll walk you through the exact math with real numbers, not vague advice. Here's what happens to most new retirees. You do the responsible thing, and it quietly backfires. Then later, there's a version of this that keeps the safety without the waste. Both are coming, and neither requires you to guess about the stock market. I'm not a financial planner, and I'm not going to pretend to be one. What I am going to do is walk you through the actual numbers, the actual rules from Medicare, Social Security, and the IRS, and a calculation you can redo yourself with your own figures. This example uses clean, round numbers, so the logic is visible. Your real numbers will differ based on your accounts, your tax situation, your state, and your age, so treat this as a framework, not a prescription. If this kind of thing is useful to you, stick around, because the second half is where the real money is. This matters most if you're within a year or two of your last paycheck, and you've got real assets behind you, a paid-down mortgage, a 401k or IRA that took decades to build, maybe a pension or a pile of savings from a sale or an inheritance. You've done the hard part. Now you're staring at a dozen decisions: when to claim, whether to roll over the 401k, what to do with the mortgage, how much cash to hold, and you don't want to get any of them wrong, because you can't exactly undo them. You're not trying to maximize every dollar. You're trying to protect something specific: your flexibility. You don't want to be forced to sell investments during a bad month. You don't want a giant tax bill you didn't see coming. You don't want your Medicare premium to jump because of a decision you made without knowing the rule. Under one common set of assumptions, getting the sequencing right can free up well over $100,000 that would otherwise sit idle for no reason. That's worth 10 minutes. So let's put numbers on it. Say you and your spouse are 65 and 67. You've got $1.2 million across your retirement and taxable accounts. Between Social Security and maybe a small pension, you're bringing in $60,000 a year, guaranteed. Your household spends $96,000 a year to live comfortably. Subtract one from the other. $96,000 minus $60,000 leaves a $36,000 annual gap, $3,000 a month, that has to come from your portfolio, one way or another. That gap is the only number that actually matters for how much cash you need sitting in low-yield savings. Not your total spending, not 2 years of everything. Just the piece your guaranteed income doesn't cover. Now move forward 18 months. You've retired. You did what almost every retirement checklist tells you to do. You moved 2 full years of total spending, $192,000 into a savings account, just to be safe. It felt like the responsible move, and it is, in the sense that you now have a mountain of accessible cash and zero chance of a forced sale in year 1. For a while, it works exactly like you'd expect. Your accounts feel stable. You're not checking the market every day. You feel like you did retirement right. Then a downturn hits. The market drops 25%. Your $1.2 million portfolio is now worth $900,000. You pull up your accounts, expecting to feel some relief that you're not selling into the decline, since you've got that huge cash pile. And you are protected, but you're protected by roughly triple what you actually needed. That $192,000 sitting in savings, earning close to nothing, isn't a smarter version of safety. It's the same safety you'd get from $54,000 plus $138,000 that could have kept growing, kept compounding, kept working for the next 20 or 30 years of retirement. Here's the rule. Almost nobody spells out. Your cash reserve should be sized to your spending gap. The part of your expenses, your guaranteed income, doesn't cover not to your total spending. You confused how much I spend with how much my portfolio actually has to fund. Those are two different numbers, and the second one is usually much smaller. Your $36,000 annual gap, held for 18 months, is $54,000. That's the number that actually determines how long you can go without touching your investments during a downturn. Everything above that is money you've pulled out of long-term growth for no additional protection. At this point, you're probably thinking, fine, but why not just skip the cash entirely and stay fully invested? Won't the market recover anyway? It might, and historically it usually has, but usually isn't a plan you build your grocery budget on. If you're fully invested with no buffer, a downturn in your first few retirement years forces you to sell shares at depressed prices just to eat and pay the mortgage, and that's the one mistake that can permanently dent a portfolio, because money you sell in a crash never gets to participate in the recovery. Going to zero cash trades one risk for a worse one. The obvious alternative isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. It solves for market risk while ignoring the risk of running out of accessible money at the wrong moment. So here's the overlooked mechanism, and it's simpler than it sounds. Instead of sizing your reserve to your spending, size it to your gap, and instead of holding it all as low-yield cash, split it by how soon you'll need it. What stays the same? Your investments stay invested, your Social Security claiming strategy doesn't have to change, and you're still holding real, spendable cash you can access without selling anything. What changes? The size and structure of that cash. You're not holding 2 years of total spending. You're holding roughly 18 months of your actual gap, split into 2 layers: cash you could spend tomorrow, and a slightly less liquid layer, like a high-yield savings account or short-term treasury holdings, for the months after that. Why that fixes the real problem. You get the same protection against being forced to sell during a downturn without permanently parking 6 figures in something earning almost nothing. The money that used to sit idle stays invested, working toward the next 10, 20, or 30 years you're going to need it to last. Before you move any large sum between accounts, check the actual terms of where that money currently sits, early withdrawal rules, account type, and any tax consequences of moving it, because those specifics can change the math for your situation. Let's put the before and after side by side. Under the conventional approach, you hold $192,000 in cash, earning close to nothing. Under the gap-based approach, you hold about $54,000. That's $138,000 that gets to stay invested instead of sitting still. Assuming a long-run real return in the ballpark of what a diversified portfolio has historically delivered, keeping that money invested rather than parked in cash is the difference between it slowly losing ground to inflation and it actually growing over a multi-decade retirement. To be clear about what this number is and isn't, it's a modeled comparison based on the assumptions we just used: a $36,000 annual gap, an 18-month reserve, and a specific starting portfolio. It's not a guarantee of investment returns, and it's not personalized tax or investment advice. Your own gap depends on your own spending and your own guaranteed income, and you should recalculate it with your real numbers. Now, what this gap-based reserve is not. It's not a replacement for having any cash at all. You still need it. It's not a claim that markets always recover on a convenient timeline. It's not a reason to skip an emergency fund for actual emergencies, like a roof or a medical bill, separate from your planned living expenses. And it's not a one-time calculation. If your spending changes, or a pension starts, or you claim Social Security later than planned, your gap changes too, and so should your reserve. Before you restructure anything, there are a few rules worth knowing, because they can quietly undo the benefit if you miss them. If you're retiring before 65, health coverage is its own gap. You need to fund COBRA, and marketplace plans are real options, but they're not free, and they need to be sized into your monthly number, not treated as an afterthought. If you're near 65 and still have coverage through a current job, Medicare's rules give you a window of about 8 months after that employment-based coverage ends to sign up for Part B without a penalty. But COBRA and retiree health plans generally don't count as current employment coverage for that purpose. So leaning on COBRA can accidentally start your enrollment clock without you realizing it. On the tax side, your Medicare premiums a couple of years from now are generally based on your tax return from about 2 years earlier, so a large one-time withdrawal or Roth conversion this year could raise your Medicare costs later, not immediately. That's a threshold worth knowing about before you convert a large chunk of an IRA, not after. And if you're pulling from a 401k specifically, there's a separate from service rule that can let you access those funds without the usual early withdrawal penalty starting the year you turn 55. But that exception generally doesn't carry over automatically if you roll that money into an IRA, so the account you hold matters as much as your age does. None of these rules make the gap-based reserve a bad idea. They just mean the 18 months figure should be built around your real income sources and your real account types, not copied from someone else's video. Now let's go back to the conventional 2 years of everything approach and actually price it out, because it's not free just because it feels safe. Holding $192,000 in cash instead of $54,000 means $138,000 sitting outside the market for years at a time. If that money would otherwise have grown at a reasonable long-run average, the lost growth over a full retirement isn't a rounding error. It can be a meaningful chunk of the eventual difference in how long your money lasts or how much you can spend later without stress. That's the real cost of over-insuring against a risk you've already covered. Put side by side, the picture is simple. The conventional approach gives you maximum peace of mind on day one and quietly costs you growth for decades. The gap-based approach gives you the same protection against forced selling, keeps 6 figures working for you, and asks for a little more attention up front to calculate correctly. Same protection, different price. The deciding factor is whether you actually have a reliable gap number. If your income and spending are unpredictable, a bigger buffer earns its keep. Here's where it gets genuinely useful. That $54,000 reserve isn't a ceiling on how much cash you're allowed to hold. It's a floor, a minimum you shouldn't dip below. If market conditions make you nervous, or you've got a big one-time expense coming, like a new roof or a vehicle, you can absolutely hold more. The point isn't to force yourself down to the smallest possible number. It's to know what the smallest responsible number actually is, so any cash above it is a choice you're making on purpose, not a default you never questioned. Think about an ordinary month in retirement versus a hard one. In an ordinary month, your gap reserve just sits there quietly, refilled once a year or so from dividends, required withdrawals, or new contributions to cash. In a hard month, a market drop, a medical bill, a family emergency, that reserve is the reason you're not selling shares at the worst possible time. It's your escape hatch, and the whole point of building it correctly is that it's there when you need it and not oversized when you don't. If you want to see the 3 realistic ways people handle this, here they are. Door 1. Keep the full 2 years of spending cushion, accept the lost growth, and get the most emotional comfort. Door 2. Switch fully to the gap-based reserve, free up the difference, and accept that you'll need to recalculate it periodically as your situation changes. Door 3. The hybrid most people land on. Hold the gap-based minimum as your floor, and keep a separate, smaller cushion on top for the specific big expenses you can already see coming, like a known home repair or a planned trip. None of these is universally correct. It depends on your temperament, your spending stability, and how much other guaranteed income you have. Now, who shouldn't touch this? If your spending is genuinely unpredictable, a business you still partly run, irregular medical costs, a dependent's needs that shift year to year, a bigger, more conservative reserve earns its keep, and you shouldn't trim it just to match a video. If you don't actually have $1.2 million or anything close to a real guaranteed income floor, the whole gap concept still applies, but your gap will be a bigger share of your spending, and your reserve needs to reflect that. If you're carrying high-interest debt, paying that down usually beats holding extra idle cash, full stop. And if calculating and rebalancing a gap-based reserve sounds like more attention than you want to give this every year, the simpler 2-year cushion isn't wrong. It's just a different trade between your time and your money. There's one more nuance worth being honest about. The gap-based reserve isn't free money, it's a trade. You're accepting slightly more complexity and slightly more attention in exchange for keeping more of your portfolio invested. If markets stay rocky for longer than 18 months, you'll be dipping into investments sooner than the 2-year approach would require. That's a real risk, and it's the actual price of this strategy, not a hidden catch revealed at the end. Home equity, similarly, isn't liquid. If part of your plan relies on tapping it later, that's a separate decision with its own costs, not a backup reserve you can access instantly. So here's the whole thing in one pass. The 2 years of spending rule feels responsible, and it is, but it's solving for the wrong number, your total spending, instead of the gap your guaranteed income doesn't already cover. That gap, in our example, was $36,000 a year, or $54,000 over 18 months. The 2-year rule locks up $192,000. The gap-based version needs about a third of that, freeing up roughly $138,000 to stay invested instead of sitting idle. The trade-off is real. Less cushion if a downturn runs long, and a number you need to recalculate as your income and spending shift. The fix isn't to abandon caution, it's to size it correctly, Hold your true minimum as a floor, and add anything extra on purpose. So, which door would you pick? The full 2-year cushion for maximum peace of mind, the lean gap-based reserve for maximum growth, or the hybrid that blends both? Tell me which one, and why not your account balances, just your reasoning. And if this saved someone you know from overstuffing a savings account the way almost every retirement checklist tells them to, it's worth passing along before they make that first transfer.